did what Speaker Johnson just 4 years ago said they should be prosecuted.
Abby, it is remarkable. I mean, if you think four years ago, back on this day, the idea that the former president not only would become a president again, but would be able to convince so many people that, he kept repeating it's a day of love, and that's the line he'll use moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it actually is not surprising that Trump was able to do that, because the very fact that January 6th happened in the first place is evidence of Trump's political power. Those people were there because of him. You saw in that video that we just played, he said, the election was stolen from us. He said that even as people were breaking into the Capitol. Trump never backed down from the fundamental lie that was at the heart of January 6th, and he still does not to this day. So January 6th, I think, is a symptom of a broader problem, which is that there are millions of people in this country who are willing to believe anything that Trump says, even if it's a blatant, provable lie. And for the Congress, I think the members, some of whom are in the chamber today, who will be in the chamber today, the members who back Trump up, who continue to try to gaslight the country about what happened that day, who insist that this was predominantly peaceful when we all saw with our own eyes what happened, those people are still in power. And I think that the next 4 years is going to be heavily influenced by their attempts, both in terms of rhetoric and in terms of official actions, because there's a lot that they want to do in Congress to try to codify this idea that January 6th was not violent. All of their words and their actions will probably be pushing toward that, and we should be aware of that and guard against it, because for the rest of us who live in the real world, we saw what happened on January 6th. We see the charges, hundreds of people charged with violent offenses. That is the truth. Those are the facts. And even a Congress who might attempt to try to put out some kind of statement that says that this was a peaceful day, that's not going to change what we all know happened.
Allison, you've talked about Democrats and Republicans kind of living in two different worlds or realities when it comes to January 6th.
Yeah, well, I remember I was working on the Biden transition that day. We were preparing to roll out the Secretary of Education. Earlier that morning, people in the Democratic Party were celebrating because we had won Georgia, for the first time. There was so much happening in our democracy that made Democrats on that day proud until what happened on the ellipse and then on to the Capitol. It also was a reminder, look, Donald Trump won the election. He's going to be inaugurated on the 20th. And there is still half of this country that did not want him to be elected. And he chose on this day, 4 years ago, to show a picture, the pretext to January 6th of him convening people. There was an opportunity, yet again, for him to be a leader today and say, that was a bad day in our history, and take some ownership. But there's not. And so I think it is the responsibility of all of us sitting here at the table not to forget, not to let our children forget, not so that we can remain a divided country, but so that we can try and work to something like this never happen again.
Scott?
Yeah, I think it'll be remembered, but I don't think it's going to be remembered singularly. I think it's going to be remembered in the context of the last 8 years, 4 years of Trump, 4 years of Biden. The fact is it happened. It was a terrible day. Political violence should never be condoned. And then we lived through 4 years of Biden's presidency, and the American people went scrambling back to Donald Trump. They chose to analyze two presidencies, which included one day and a whole bunch of other policy decisions, and they went back to Trump. The other thing about this day and about this election that I think is noteworthy and actually positive is this. It's not been since 1988 that Democrats have not challenged a Republican win on the floor of the House when trying to count the votes. I've never had an election in my adult professional career in which both sides basically accepted it without too much grumbling. Obviously, 00 and 04, Democrats didn't accept Bush. There were Republicans who didn't accept Obama. We know Democrats still think Russia stole the election in 2016. We know what happened in 2020. This time around, it seems to me that most people have basically accepted the results of the election. Also, the Electoral Reform Count Act passed in 2022, clarifying that the vice president only has ministerial duty, so that's going to go off without a hitch today. It feels like maybe we've gotten off the slippery slope of one side or the other not accepting the outcome of an election. So in its totality over the last quarter century, I tend to think that's a good thing.
I think, start.
Well, I was just going to say, look, I get it, and I agree that in the long run, I think that the days of, January 6 fights are probably going to be over. We did a great thing with the Electoral Count Act reform. But we have to be very careful. We can't put Democrats, and I was against them doing it when they did it, obviously, against Democrats opposing the election. Yeah. We can't put that on the same level what happened on January 6th. It's one thing for a few people to say, we're going to vote against certification of this election. Once it would have hit critical mass in the Democrats, I'm pretty sure if it would have hit critical mass, the leadership would have come out and said, no, we can't do this. Instead, Republican leadership like Kevin McCarthy shocked us all on January 1st on a phone call when he said he as well is going to object to the certification of this election. And when he did that, that's when I predicted that day there'll be violence on the 6th because you're convincing half of the country an election was stolen. And by the way, Scott, if I believed an election was stolen, I would have been on the steps of the Capitol that day because we're a country that believes we should have a voice heard. And that's the danger of terrible leadership and convincing people of lies.
Straight ahead, we're going to return to the spot where Capitol security was breached 4 years ago to find a very different scene. And will there be any unexpected objections as Congress certifies President-elect Trump's electoral win? Stay with us.